Meeting back to order. So back to item 10, the Christchurch Christchurch flood post-event report. Now, Rebecca, welcome to the table. That's great. Before we get you to start answering some questions, I just want to check that we've still got Yanni with us. Yanni, are you still there?
Yeah, I am. I don't think you could hear me on the last item. I was here, but that's
right.
Okay. Just in regards to
planning. All right, great. But you're with us now. That's good. So now let's move into questions then on item 10. So starting with Glenn. Glenn, you had a question.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for coming to orders. I just wanted to reconcile what looks like some statements that perhaps aren't quite joining up, and also to get a sense of perspective over events. So if you want to offer that as well at some point over the number of cars, etc., that would be good. And on that note, okay, I'm going to flip between the first page of the report and page 121, because in the beginning of the report it talks about generally that the response from a CDM event went quite well, and then it follows up with 68 corrective actions. So are you able to provide some perspective over that? I've got some other questions after that, you know, over whether that is, in terms of proportion, usual, normal. It seems a lot to me.
I think, yeah, good morning everybody. I think I can speak quite generally on this matter. The number of corrective actions, certainly from my perspective, would seem to be proportionate. We are heavily invested in developing the corrective action process. It's something that is extremely important. And we obtain feedback from a range of people, including those who have worked in the Emergency Operations Centre. And so the corrective action process is one that is quite nuanced in terms of the issues that are raised and that are addressed. But one of the key pieces of work that we're currently looking at is consolidating the corrective actions from across the emergencies that we've managed over the last couple of years in particular. So there are key themes that keep coming up that we're currently addressing. So for example, EOC rostering is a common theme. So it's a piece of work that is critical to us. It's extremely important that all those corrective actions are documented accurately and that are addressed. And certainly in terms of numbers and proportionality, to my mind, that number is not unexpected, certainly.
Right. A couple of more questions. Thank you for that. Just page 119, number 60. Just a minute of navigating around this thing. It talks about the event being a quote-unquote, okay, earlier on, it says the event was a small event. Isn't that rather understating, though, the event, given the effect on people?
Absolutely. I think there's a distinction to be made between the size of the event and the impact on community. And certainly the wording of that is certainly not intended to detract from the impact of community. That is certainly first and foremost in our mind, you know, whether it's one home that has been impacted or multiple homes. I think in terms of proportionality and scale of our emergency response, that wording is probably considered in the light of other activations, and specifically those of the size of the Canterbury earthquakes, for example.
Okay. And thank you. My final question relates to NIWA. That's page, now it's 106 in our big agendas. It might be 38 in your report, and it's the corrective action number 13, where it says there is currently no access to advanced storm surge forecasts, and then it talks about NIWA in the outcome column, but my understanding is NIWA actually didn't advise us of the storm surge. Is that that's correct? So they didn't feed us that?
Yeah, unfortunately I can't comment on that.
Because that added a significant amount. It took South Shore by surprise.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're being a bit kind to NIWA there.
So the I think it was the combined factors that NIWA hadn't taken into effect of the was it low pressure, the storm surge and the king tide all happening at once. They had forecasted the weather and some of the factors, but they hadn't actually accounted for the fact that it would have such a, with the king tide.
Okay.
And,
so they're responsible for forecasting all of the factors that will go into a certain event. But my understanding is they didn't advise on the surge part, which added a fair bit to the... Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pauline.
I'm just wondering, these events take a really big toll on the staff in our organisation. When we talk about one of the learnings might be, or one of the identified needs is further resourcing, does that, and training for people to be trained in civil defence, so would that actually imply that we could alleviate some of the workload for our council staff if we had more resourcing there? Or is it an area where it has to be our council staff manning that centre?
So at this time, and Rebecca can follow up on what she's done since she's arrived, but at this point of this event, which was July last year, we didn't have a large number of people trained and on the roster. And so that was highlighted as we'd had the series of events and the same people were coming into these. Since then, and Rebecca's now stepped into that role, there has been a huge increase in the number of people across council that are trained, the number of volunteers and people we have in our response teams. So that impact shouldn't be the same now because there's many more, but you may want to...
Yes, absolutely. So we've increased the numbers of trained staff, but we also recognise that it's about developing, looking at international best practice and how we can learn from that in terms of things like EOC rostering, for example, EOC rostering practice, and all the initiatives that we're working on currently, whether that be training or EOC readiness. Our main focus, or one of our main focuses, is people. I think we recognise that there have been a lot of council staff that have been involved in a number of activations. We recognise the toll that that has often on people personally, and the effort and the goodwill that is involved in people's participation in our activities. And so everything that we're doing currently is around putting people and people's welfare first, whether that's through ensuring that council staff have access to high quality training, good EOC facilities, and robust rostering processes is critical to avoid people from burning out and becoming too tired during the activation. So that whole staff welfare issue is one that is absolutely paramount. We couldn't do what we do without good quality trained council staff, and we very much appreciate all their efforts.
So it's a combination of we do need our good trained, skilled staff in there, but you've got more resourcing to reduce the number of hours that they do. I know that people were doing, odd days and days and very little sleep, and staff members who already have an incredible workload week by week here. So we could see the burnout, and I was very concerned about that. So that's really good news.
Absolutely, that's not sustainable.
No.
And it's something that we've recognised very early on. And we need to look after each other and look after our people. It's as simple as that.
There's also been another initiative that's been delivered by the regional Canterbury seeding team. It's the Canterbury 10 team. So there's a response team of 10 people that have been trained up in May, and there's another 10 going through who can be called upon by the territorial authority that's got a response to bring some skill sets in that you might be lacking in particular SIMS functions, or just to give some advice and support and help through particularly those that first 7 days if you've got a lengthy response, so that you can actually manage people's welfare within the territorial authority. So there's a number of initiatives at play there around supporting the resourcing. Yeah.
The only other thing I'd add to that is that as we get better at these events, and this was one of the events that did go well, the burnout's less likely. because I think one of the things that hits people is when they work really hard and then it doesn't go well or they get criticised in the media for things. As we get better at this and things go better and we look after our communities better and our citizens better and they feel more positive, people are more positive about being involved in the event. So I think we're seeing, we're getting better and it takes less of a toll on the people that are there.
Thank you. Phil.
Thank you, because this is a huge amount of work. And I raised this at the committee too, but I just want to make sure it does happen. There's a number of areas where, in fact, the outcomes haven't been finished, and some is around the messaging. I'm just wanting to make sure that, given all the work, that these parts would still be completed.
Yes, absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, we are doing a lot of work to consolidate all the corrective actions from across the emergency. So there are sort of common themes. And certainly in future, for future reports, we will be making sure that all the fields are fully completed and that full information is provided, even if we don't necessarily have a current update for you. But yeah, you can be assured that we go through each action item very carefully and it's incorporated into our work plans. So we really endeavour to ensure that nothing is overlooked.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you. I just really want to thank you for the work you're doing, and I think that it's about continual improvement. And you've pointed out about the numbers of people required and now lifting. And it just doesn't happen overnight, and it's nothing worse than having people that are not skilled or unable to carry out the roles that they've been given, which is even more dangerous. So I just really want to thank the three of you and all those behind you that have done this and that it's continually working on improving. So cheers.
Thank you.
I had a question as well, Andrew.
Yeah, sure. Yanni, go ahead.
Oh, cool. Thank you. I've sent through some questions in regards to this report. And first off, I did want to thank staff for doing the report. I personally think it's great that we're looking at these events and evaluating what's worked and what hasn't worked. I did have some concern that the report, a bit similar to Councillor Livingston's questions at the start, in that there seemed to be something go wrong on the Friday, and I don't see sort of reference to that. I know in some of the corrective actions there seems to be reference to getting greater collaboration between the contractor and Intel, but just to give you one example, there was heavy equipment sent into Clarendon Terrace that shouldn't have been there, and the people driving the truck, it was quite weird to think that they would go into an area where they weren't safe being in. So I just wanted to kind of check through the corrective action what's proposed in regards to that sort of what we would do differently, if you like, in terms of that.
So we're not aware of that. So we'll follow up on that particular incident. I don't think we've got that recorded. So we'll follow up and just see what record we've got of that incident.
Right. So there was a massive city care truck that was sent in on Friday to, I think, clear the drains or suck the water out. And the flooding was already at such an extent that it was quite hazardous. And you also had local residents who were trapped without any sort of mechanism to deal with it. I personally rang the call centre, and there seemed to be a gap at the call centre as well. So again, I don't want to be critical of the
same event, Councillor Johansson, because there were two flood events, and this one is the one where we had response teams in quite early in there, and outdoor knocking, and we had repeated people going out each day. So
this is the same event. So what happened was along the Heathcote, and it's really great to get the map of the properties that were affected. I also sent through to the comms team when the initial comms came out that there'd been no reference to this area, and as you've seen from the map, it was the area that was most affected, and yet none of the comms going out at the start of the event referenced this area and what we were doing or what people should do. But It is the same event. There was flooding, I think it was about 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon that got quite bad and actually prevented people from being able to get out of their houses safely. The response teams, I think, went out about 6, 7 o'clock at night. So there was a kind of 3-hour period where there was a lot of confusion over our response. And again, like I think, you know, again, there's a lot of corrective actions that you've identified. So I was just a bit surprised to see the initial introduction about things going really well without reference to kind of the initial kind of confusion that seemed to appear on the Friday from my experience.
If I may, sort of generally around that, we'll certainly look into the specific incident that you've referred to. I understand, so there's the issue of response teams visiting homes and residents on a door-to-door basis. We were certainly unaware of any conversation that might have taken place regarding this, but I should add that it's something that we proactively use the response teams in our response to Cyclone Gita, a more recent event, and that worked well and has been incorporated into future plans. So I think that pre-warning of residents through the deployment of the response teams is something that we find to be highly effective from an emergency management point of view, and we've also had good feedback from community around that. So that has certainly been incorporated into future plans. Secondly, if I may just address the issue of public information more broadly. We're doing and continue to work very closely with the Public Information Management Team, or the PIM team as it's referred to. And this, again, are processes which are currently and constantly being improved on thanks to the work of the media team and our collaboration with them. So we recognise very much that communication very early on in the piece is absolutely essential, not just even once civil defence have been activated, but once city services are involved, essentially as part of their business as usual processes, then that public information management is a critical part of all of those processes, and is something that we're certainly strengthening and feeding that into our decision making process. The land drainage team have also been doing a lot of work around their business as usual processes, so for surface water flooding, etc., and their response to that. And again, that's another area where we've learnt a lot of lessons, and we're collaborating more fully with that team prior to the transition necessarily into a civil defence response. So there's been a lot of work being done both in that public information space, looking at how we deploy response teams to notify residents, and also with city services. It's absolutely critical that we learn from these lessons, and I'll certainly follow up on that specific incident that you've referred to.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as you referenced, I think we did do some pre-notification at one of the more recent events, which I just really commend you for picking up on that. That's something that I'd put forward previously, and I think it's really positive. I'm happy to take up the communication stuff offline. If you can see the emails that I sent through around the July event, and I think there's some gaps, so happy to address that. The final two questions I had was, there's a flood defence fund. Has that in the report, the target date was 30th of June 2018. At the public land drainage meetings, one of the issues of clean-up arose, and the feedback we had from the July event is that the clean-up went really well, but anecdotal feedback from those land drainage meetings was people were quite unhappy and it hadn't been as good as the time before. So the Flood Defence Fund, is that set up now? How are we able to access it? And could it assist with things like clean-up?
Perhaps I could answer that. It's coming through the Land Drainage Working Group, and it's at the stage now where we are just organising a meeting that we've been working with the governance staff at the community boards. Yeah, community boards and the service centres, yes. And so then we're going to have a joint meeting with the community boards, get their feedback into it, then it will come back through the committee and and be recommended to council. It has been a long process, but this is a better way to do it because we're actually working with the people on the ground, like you, Yanni, that have got good input to see determine the best way forward. So it's not far off now.
Right, and just the final question was the thing that I can't see in the corrective actions, and I may have missed it. There's quite a few, but we don't appear to have local flooding response plans for each area, and so the response tends to be quite high level. And I just wondered whether, in terms of community engagement, whether there's any program in place to develop local flooding response plans with local communities. So in each area of the city, obviously there'll be different things, but for example, along the places in the Heathcote in my ward, one of the issues that was really clear was that people were not prepared to wade through stormwater that had sewage. That people didn't have gumboots, people didn't have proper clothing, they had children that, it was a risk. So I just wondered whether things like, response kits.
That is what you have the opportunity to put that input into when the community board meeting with the land drainage group and the flood defence plan comes.
But I don't think it's part of the flood defence fund. I think it's more strategic planning with our intel, our land drainage, our community around what's the best thing to do.
If we can just answer that one, you will have seen in the LTP levels of service that just came to council for the LTP discussions. There is a level of service around local community action or resilience planning, and so that we have a community resilience team that's working with local communities about the planning around the particular local issues of that area. So in the Port Hills, it may be fires. In flood areas, it might be floods, and in other areas, there may be multiple areas. So there's a team in civil defence that are working with communities.
So,
yes,
is there a time frame?
The community boards, as Councillor Clearwater said, but they are working progressively with communities to identify issues and plan around them.
Right. So in terms of the Heathcote, which, as you can see from the map, was really badly impacted. Is there a kind of prioritisation around where we'll get those flood response plans put in place first as a priority, based on risk?
Discussions, as Councillor Clearwater said, there's been discussions and planning out with community boards around what their priorities are, and some of the other priorities depend on the community's readiness to participate in this. So we can certainly send the team, resilience team can send you information about that.
Okay, yeah, again, this has been going on since 2014, and in that time we've seen huge community impact, particularly along certain places in the Heathcote, and I'm just really concerned that we get on top of this as soon as possible, given that it has been outstanding for so long. But thank you for the work that you're doing. I really appreciate the corrective actions and the review. I think it's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? All right, so Pauline, you're happy to move this? Do we have a seconder, Mike Davidson? Is there any debate?
Just
Glenn.
a quick comment. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for this. I know, obviously personally, a lot of the staff. Well, of course, you're involved in civil defence. You act in this role when an event comes our way. We've all read the report. We're grateful for everything done. I just think in the executive summary, though, you've been a bit kind to NIWA, who didn't advise over the surge, which added, as it says, 400 mils, which is a significant amount, and took communities such as South Shore by surprise, and we're grateful for the staff there who came to the rescue. We take sea level rise seriously as one component part of the overall effect when you get those, the perfect storm it's called, which it just, it was here as well. So I think it's important we actually do call out these communication breakdowns. We had it over the Kaikoura tsunami situation with civil defence in Wellington. So, I think it's really important. I take the scope and the purpose of the report is to look at us, but we aren't disconnected from the outside agencies and their provision of information too. But thank you for this and all the work you've done.
Pauline.
Just very, very quickly, I want to thank you as well, and for the staff and all the past events, and we've all seen the work that you put in and the stress, and I don't think people realise it's a 24-hour operation and it can go on for weeks, not just during the event but a long time after. So it's really pleasing to see that that resourcing has gone and there's training happening and there's some relief there for all the staff and not having to do the long rosters. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and yeah, thanks for coming along to answer these questions this morning. Thanks for all the work done to put this report together. It's great that it's such a comprehensive report. It's great that it's identified some areas for improvement, and of course we've heard this morning that there's already work underway to implement some of that. So excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you.